She broke every promise she made to me, and now it's time for her to pay. My name is Aaron Douglas. I'm 48 years old, and I run the highest stakes underground poker game in Carson City. My father was a professional gambler, and he taught me early, life's just a series of bets. Some people play it safe, folding at the first sign of risk. Others go all in, chasing something they'll never catch. Me? I play to win. Always have. The Silver Ace isn't much to look at from the outside, just another bar on a dusty Nevada road. But step past the neon sign and the stench of cheap beer, and you'll find my domain. A room in the back, smoke thick in the air, men hunched over felt tables, cards in their hands, money on the line. Here, nobody plays for fun. You put up what you're willing to lose, and I make sure the house always gets a cut. It's a simple business. A clean one, if you don't count the occasional sore loser who needs convincing to settle his debt. I've made a living off reading people. A twitch of a finger, a glance too long at a card, the way a man exhales after a bluff, it all tells me what I need to know. And lately, my wife's been playing a game she's not built for. Poppy used to be different. Hell, back when we first met, she was the one dragging me out into the wild, hiking through the Sierras, sleeping under the stars. Now, she hardly looks at me. She's always got some excuse, book club, girls' night, a solo weekend trip to Lake Tahoe. I let it slide at first, gave her space. But then I started noticing the little things. The way her phone was always face down. How she'd leave the room to take calls, her voice suddenly soft, almost nervous. I don't believe in gut feelings. I believe in proof. So I got some. Walter Brown owed me a favor. Lanky, sarcastic, always in a damn hoodie. The guy lives in his basement buried under 3 monitors and enough illegal software to make the feds nervous. I gave him Poppy's number. Told him I needed answers. 2 days later, I had them. Aaron, buddy, you ain't gonna like this, Walter had said, handing me a thumb drive. He didn't need to say more. I took it, plugged it into my laptop that night, and sat there, watching his every text, every late-night call, every shared location pin loaded on the screen. Dr. Landon Black. Local vet. Good guy, if you asked anyone in town. Always had a kind word. Always had time for your dog. And apparently always had time for my wife. I didn't get mad. No yelling, no punching walls. I just stared at the screen, taking it in. The way she talked to him, light, excited, nothing like how she spoke to me lately. The way he comforted her, told her she deserved to be free, to live life on her terms. The pictures. Nothing too obvious, but enough. Her, smiling in his truck. A sunset behind them, somewhere in the mountains. Him, holding her close in a way that said everything. I closed the laptop and poured myself a drink. Neat, 2 fingers of bourbon. Good stuff. Didn't even flinch when it burned on the way down. Poppy was already asleep when I went to bed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. She had no idea I knew. No idea what was coming. Some men would cry. Some would beg. Some would break down, ask why, ask what they did wrong. I wasn't some men. Poppy had placed her bet. Now it was my turn to play my hand. The next morning, I made her coffee like I always did. Black, 1 sugar. She came into the kitchen in a loose sweatshirt, hair still damp from the shower, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I watched her take that first sip, the same way she always had, standing at the counter like she was already halfway out the door. You going somewhere today? I asked, keeping my voice easy, casual. She hesitated. A small pause, just a second too long, but I caught it. Yeah, meeting Claire for lunch. Might hit the trails after. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. She was never a good liar. I nodded, took a bite of my toast. Which trail? She shrugged. Haven't decided yet. Another sip of coffee. Why? No reason. Thought maybe I'd join you. That got her attention. Her head snapped up just slightly, I searching my face. I held my expression steady, taking another bite like it was nothing. She forced a smile, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Oh, it's just, a girl's thing. Right. Of course. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and kissed the top of her head like I always did. She barely leaned into it. By noon, she was gone. I waited exactly 15 minutes before pulling out my phone and calling Walter. Track her. She gave you the meeting Claire line again? He asked, already typing. She did. He let out a low whistle. Man, she's not even trying. A few seconds passed, then I heard him clicking away. All right. She's heading out of town. Got a location ping near Truckee. Truckee. That meant she wasn't just sneaking off for a quick meetup. She was making a day of it, probably meeting him at some cabin, drinking wine, acting like she was the main character in some bullshit romance novel. I grabbed my keys. Send me the coordinates. By the time I hit the highway, I had the address. A little rental tucked into the trees, the kind that came with a wood-burning fireplace and a stack of brochures about reconnecting with nature. The drive gave me time to think. About how she looked at me that morning, how easy the lie had come. About Landon Black, that soft-spoken bastard, whispering in her ear, telling her she deserved more, deserved better. He didn't know a damn thing about what she deserved. I parked a few hundred yards down, where the trees got thick. Walked the rest of the way, keeping to the brush. The place was small, quiet. A single car in the driveway, his. The curtains weren't closed. Amateurs. From where I stood, I could see them through the window, standing in the kitchen. She was laughing at something, leaning against the counter. He was cooking. Cooking, for Christ's sake. Some men stole your wife. Others made her eggs before they did it. I watched for a minute, steadying my breathing, making sure the anger stayed where it belonged, under control. Then I walked up to the front door and knocked. The sound of the laughter inside died. I heard footsteps, the floor creaking, then the door cracked open just slightly. Landon's face appeared, confusion turning into alarm the second he saw me. Aaron. I shoved the door open hard enough to send him stumbling back. Walked inside like I owned the place, because in that moment, I did. Poppy gasped, hands flying to her mouth. Aaron, what the hell? I shut the door behind me, slow and deliberate. Morning, I said, looking between the two of them. Hope I'm not interrupting breakfast. Landon swallowed hard, trying to play it calm. Aaron, listen. No, I turned my eyes on Poppy. You listen. She took a step back, pressing against the counter. I could see it now, that flicker of guilt, that moment where she realized there was no talking her way out of this. You've been lying to me for months, I said, voice even, steady. Walking into my house every night, kissing me, playing the role, like I wouldn't notice. I turned to Landon. And you? You really thought this would stay quiet? He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. You don't know who the hell you're playing with. I took a step forward, watching him tense. You've got a business, right? A nice little vet clinic, full of loyal customers. People who trust you. What do you think happens when they find out the guy taking care of their pet screws married women in his spare time? Landon's face went pale. I let the words settle before turning back to Poppy. And you? You thought you could sneak around and not get caught? Thought I'd just roll over and take it? Her lips parted, but nothing came out. That's the difference between us, Poppy. You never knew when to fold. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The weight of the truth did all the damage. I turned, walked to the door, and paused. Pack your things when you get home. You've got until tomorrow. Then I left. Didn't slam the door, didn't look back. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the rest of the day in my usual spot at the Silver Ace, back in the game room where men came to lose money they shouldn't be gambling. The familiar sound of cards shuffling, chips clinking, the occasional muttered curse, all of it settled into my bones like a rhythm I'd lived by for years. I wasn't thinking about Poppy. Not in the way a broken man does, at least. I was thinking about the next move. About how to make sure she walked away with nothing but regret. About how to make sure Landon Black would never forget my name. Oliver showed up around 8, moving slow like always. He dropped into the chair across from me, his heavy frame settling in with a sigh. The bartender had already poured him a drink before he even asked, whiskey, neat. He took a sip, let out a tired breath, and looked at me the way an old dog looks at a young one about to do something stupid. So, he said, rolling the glass between his fingers. How bad was it? I didn't answer right away, just tapped my fingers against the edge of my stack of chips, watching the dealer shuffle. Oliver didn't push. He just waited, patience carved deep into the lines on his face. Finally, I spoke. Bad enough. He nodded like he expected that. You beat the hell out of him? No, I glanced up, met his eyes. That's what he was hoping for. Would have been easy for him to play the victim, turn this into some sob story. I don't hand out easy exits. Oliver let out a slow, knowing breath. So, what's next? I slid a few chips forward, watched the dealer flip the cards, making sure they lose more than I did. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Aaron. Don't. I cut him off. Voice calm but firm. Don't tell me to let it go. Not after everything I've built. Oliver didn't argue. He just swirled his drink, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light. Just make sure you're playing the right game, he muttered. I didn't answer. I'd already decided. 2 nights later, I set the bait. Word travels fast in a town like this, especially when you make sure the right people hear what they need to. I let it slip that I was hosting an exclusive high-stakes game, invite only, $5,000 minimum buy-in. Just enough to make it irresistible to men with more greed than sense. The kind of game that makes reputations or buries them. I made sure the invitation landed in the right hands. Poppy wasn't speaking to me, not directly, but I knew she was still talking to Landon. Knew she'd be looking for some way to convince herself she hadn't just torched her life for a man who didn't have the spine to stand his ground. And Landon? He'd want to prove something. To her, to himself. So I made sure he heard about the game. Walter was the one who confirmed it. He called me late that night, voice dry and amused. Guess who just wired himself $5,000? A slow grin pulled at my lips. Tell me it's our favorite veterinarian. Bingo. Looks like Dr. Do-Gooder wants to play with the big boys. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my legs out. Good. Let's make sure he gets the full experience. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait. The Silver Ace was packed by the time I walked in. The usual crowd was there, men with faces worn by bad choices, sharp-eyed sharks looking for easy prey, a few newcomers trying too hard to look like they belonged. The backroom was even tighter, filled with the kind of men who didn't flinch when the stakes got high. This was the kind of game where you didn't just lose money. You lost standing, lost face. You didn't walk in unless you knew how to walk out. Landon Black didn't know how to walk out. He was already seated at the table when I stepped in, his shoulders tense despite the relaxed front he was trying to put on. He ditched his usual scrubs for a button-down and a cheap watch, trying to blend in with the kind of men who lived for this. His hands rested near his stack of chips, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm he probably wasn't even aware of. Poppy wasn't here, but she didn't have to be. He was playing for her, whether he admitted it or not. I took my seat across from him, nodding at the dealer. The cards started moving. For the first hour, I let him breathe. Let him win a few small pots. Let him think maybe, just maybe, he had a shot. That was the thing about guys like him. Deep down, they thought luck meant something. Thought that if they wanted something bad enough, the universe would hand it to them. I knew better. By the second hour, I tightened the noose. Raised when I knew he was bluffing. Folded when I had him right where I wanted. Watched his stack start to bleed. Watched the tension creep into his jaw, his grip on the cards getting just a little tighter. The others at the table were catching on too. Smelled the desperation. Oliver stood at the bar, watching from a distance, nursing a drink. He knew what was coming. Another hand, another call. Landon hesitated, glanced at his dwindling stack. I saw it in his eyes, that stubborn hope, the kind that makes men bet their last dollar thinking it'll change something. He pushed his chips forward, voice a little too steady. All in. I let a beat pass, then gave him a slow, measured smile. Call. The room got quiet. A few guys leaned in, watching as the dealer flipped the cards. Landon's face fell before he even processed it fully. My cards were better. His money was gone. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, trying to laugh it off like it didn't matter. Damn, he muttered, shaking his head. Guess that's poker. I leaned back, tapping my fingers against my stack of chips. Guess so. He started to stand, but I didn't let him. You know, I said, keeping my voice casual, I hear you're good at fixing things. Must be nice, having a job where people trust you. I picked up a chip, turned it between my fingers. Trust's a funny thing, though. Real easy to lose. Landon's face went stiff. He knew where this was going. I let the silence stretch, then leaned in just slightly. See, I don't think Poppy ever told you how Carson City really works. How small this town gets when the wrong kind of rumors start floating. I let the words settle, then lowered my voice just enough. What do you think happens when every woman in town finds out their beloved vet screws married women? You think they'll still bring their pets to you? Think they'll still smile when you walk into a grocery store? His throat bobbed. Aaron. I'm not done. I dropped the chip onto the table, the click loud in the quiet room. You walked into my life, my house, and took what wasn't yours. Thought there wouldn't be a price. That's where you miscalculated. I saw it then, that flicker of panic, the realization that this wasn't just about poker. That he'd been playing in a game he was never meant to win. I stood, smoothing out my jacket. I'll be seeing you, Landon. I turned, heading for the door, but stopped just short. Oh, and I'd start looking for a new clinic. Something tells me your business is about to take a hit. I didn't wait for a response. Didn't need to. By the time I stepped into the main bar, Oliver was already shaking his head, but he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. I'd made my point. Landon was finished. He just didn't know it yet. By the time I walked out of the Silver Ace, the news was already working its way through town. That's the thing about places like Carson City, people talk, and they talk fast. It wasn't just that he lost big at the table. It was the way he lost. A man's reputation is worth more than his money in a town like this, and Landon's was unraveling. I didn't have to do much. Just let the right words slip in the right places. A casual mention to a few wives about how their friendly neighborhood vet had a habit of making house calls he shouldn't. A joke to a few husbands about how Landon played with more than just animals. By the next morning, the damage was done. Walter called before noon, amusement thick in his voice. Damn, Aaron, you work fast. His clinic's already getting cancellations. I smirked, sipping my coffee. That right? Yeah. Some woman just posted on Facebook, talking about how she can't in good conscience support a man who breaks up families. The comments are a war zone. You really outdid yourself. Didn't do anything, I said mildly. Just let the truth do its thing. I could hear Walter shaking his head. Cold, man. Ice cold. I didn't bother responding. This wasn't about being cold. It was about balance. Landon took something from me, thought he could walk away clean. I was just making sure he understood the cost. Poppy was next. She came by the house that afternoon. I knew she would. She hadn't been home since that morning at the cabin, and I'd made it clear she had until the day to pack her things. When she pulled into the driveway, I was already waiting. She stepped out of the car, sunglasses covering her face, shoulders stiff. Aaron. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. Poppy. She swallowed, then lifted her chin. We need to talk. No, we don't. Her lips pressed together. You can't just throw me out. I raised an eyebrow. I can. I did. She let out a sharp breath, taking a step forward. Aaron, I don't. My voice was steady, firm. I don't care what you have to say. You made your choices. Now you live with them. Her jaw tightened. You think you're punishing me? That I won't be fine on my own? I tilted my head slightly. You tell me. Your boyfriend's about to lose his business, your family won't take your calls, and Zoe won't even look at you. But yeah, sure. You'll be fine. That hit the mark. Her face went pale, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She tried to cover it, forcing a laugh, but it came out hollow. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I pushed off the railing, stepping down onto the porch. No. But I'm not sorry, either. I held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded toward the house. Go pack your things. For a second, I thought she might argue. But then, without another word, she turned and walked inside. I stayed outside, listening to the muffled sounds of drawers opening, zippers closing. 20 minutes later, she was back, suitcase in hand. She paused at the doorway, looking at me like she wanted to say something. I didn't give her the chance. I just opened the door wider. She walked past me without another word. The moment she drove off, I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight lift. One down. One more to go. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that lets you hear every damn thought you don't want to. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the dust settle in the afternoon light. Poppy's scent still lingered in the air, faint traces of her perfume mixed with the sharp bite of the leather couch. It didn't matter. By tomorrow, I'd air the place out. Zoe wasn't home yet. She was at a friend's, which was for the best. She didn't need to see her mother pack up and leave. I didn't need to hear Poppy try to explain herself to a daughter who had already made up her mind. Oliver showed up just after sunset. He didn't knock, just let himself in the way he always had. He took one look at the half-empty bottle of bourbon on the counter and grunted. Figured you'd either be drinking or burning her shit in the yard. I poured him a glass and slid it across the counter. Not my style. He nodded, taking a slow sip, watching me. So, it's done. Almost. He let out a breath, shaking his head. You already took everything from the guy. His business is shot, his name's dirt. What else is there? I leaned against the counter, rolling my glass between my palms. I want to see his face when it all hits. Oliver exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his face. Jesus, Aaron. You got the blood, now you want the body too. It's not about that. I looked at him, steady. It's about the lesson. Oliver didn't argue. He just muttered something under his breath and took another drink. The next morning, I got what I wanted. Landon's clinic had already been circling the drain. But this was the final nail in the coffin. When I walked in, the place was nearly empty. The receptionist barely glanced up before looking away like she wished she were somewhere else. The waiting room, which usually had a line of folks waiting for their appointments, was quiet. Landon was in his office, staring at his computer screen like it might show him a way out of this. He didn't hear me come in, not until I shut the door behind me. He flinched, then exhaled sharply when he saw it was me. Jesus, Aaron, what the hell do you want? I took my time looking around his office. Family photos on the wall. Diplomas. A certificate from some veterinary conference in San Diego. All the little things that made up a life. A life that was crumbling under him. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Just came to check on you. His jaw tightened. You satisfied? You've done enough, all right? You ruined me. I studied him, tapping a slow rhythm on the armrest. No, Landon. You did that yourself. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You think this makes you a better man? You think this proves something? I leaned in slightly. I think it proves you were never ready for this game. I let the words settle before standing. Consider this my last visit. You won't see me again. I walked out, leaving him sitting there in the wreckage of his choices. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. A week later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. Aaron Douglas? The voice was smooth, confident. A woman. Who's asking? Nevaeh Freeman. A pause. I think we have something in common. I knew that name. Landon's ex. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Well, Nevaeh, I said, I'm listening. Nevaeh Freeman was sharp. The kind of woman who didn't waste time on small talk, didn't dress her words up to make them easier to swallow. I respected that. When we met at a diner just outside of town, she was already waiting, stirring a cup of black coffee, I scanning the room like she was used to being cautious. She looked like a woman who had been burned before but learned how to use the fire. You look exactly how I imagined, she said as I slid into the seat across from her. And how's that? She smirked, like a man who doesn't lose. I let that sit for a moment, then signaled the waitress for coffee. You didn't call me to compliment my face. What do you want? She leaned back, crossing her arms, considering me. Landon ran, she said finally. Packed up and left town 3 nights ago. Closed the clinic, broke the lease on his apartment. Didn't even bother trying to fight for his reputation. I wasn't surprised. It was the smart move. He lost his business, his name was dirt, and Poppy wasn't enough to hold him here. The man had finally figured out that this wasn't a game he could win. Figured he would, I said, taking a sip of coffee. Nevaeh studied me for a long moment. You're not even a little curious where he went? No, I said simply. Doesn't matter. She nodded like she expected that. Poppy's not much better off, she added. Her family's cut her off, Zoe won't talk to her, and whatever plans she had with Landon are obviously dead. Word is she's staying with some old friend out in Reno, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't feel a damn thing hearing it. Not regret, not satisfaction. Just a dull confirmation of what I already knew. Poppy wasn't built for consequences. She thought she could take what she wanted and still land on her feet. But the thing about burning bridges is that eventually you find yourself on the wrong side of the river. Nevaeh set down her cup and leaned forward slightly. I should thank you, she said. You did what I wanted to do months ago. I raised an eyebrow. You could have. She laughed, low and bitter. Maybe. But I don't play the way you do. You're different. I met her gaze, recognizing something in her expression that I'd seen in my own reflection more than once. Someone who learned the hard way that trust was just another gamble, and most people weren't worth the bet. We finished our coffee, and before she left, she handed me her number. In case you ever need an ally, she said. I slid the paper into my pocket. I'll keep that in mind. Weeks passed, then months. Landon never showed his face again. Poppy made a few weak attempts to reach out. One drunken voicemail, a half-assed apology text, but I ignored them. I had nothing left to say. Zoe stayed with me. She never asked about her mother, never wanted to see her. That was her choice, and I respected it. She focused on school, on her own life, and I made sure she never had to question where she stood with me. The Silver Ace was busier than ever. Word had spread about what happened that night, and now, every man who sat at my table knew exactly what kind of game I played. You came in knowing the rules. If you lost, you paid up. Simple as that. One night, Oliver sat across from me, a fresh drink in hand, watching the room with a slow, approving nod. You did it, he said. Took the hit, came out stronger. I shrugged. Didn't have a choice. He smirked. Everybody's got a choice, Aaron. You just make the right ones. I didn't argue. Didn't need to. I dealt the next hand, the weight of the cards familiar in my grip. The room buzzed around me. Laughter, tension. The quiet hum of men trying to read each other. Life was a gamble. Some people played it safe. Some people lost everything. Me? I never lost. And I never would.